All right, so now moving on to the next section of Unit 6. So that's 6B, and it's going to be complementary and supplementary angles. So that's what this entire video is going to be about, are these two different kinds of angles. So your learning objectives for this video is to know what they are, first off, how we can define them, and then also how we'll be able to apply them and answering some questions. All right, there are just two definitions. I'll go over a way that we can try to remember, an easy way maybe for you to remember them, but the key thing is not only just remembering, but being able to apply it when answering some questions. All right, so let's first go through the definition, and then there's some examples that we're going to go through together. All right, so in the last video, we actually kind of already went through complementary angles without giving it its name. But complementary angles are angles when their sum is measured in 90 degrees. All right, so in the last section that we did in the last video, you guys answered a question like this where you were given a right angle, and then you were given some information about the angles that made it up, and then you had to solve for it. So although we weren't necessarily learning complementary angles there, that's what we're doing now. So the difference though is the questions that we are doing before we learned about complementary angles, they had to be adjacent, meaning there couldn't be any gaps in the angles. They had to form a complete 90-degree angle together. So when we were doing those questions in the last section, the angles had to be adjacent for us to solve them. And the same thing for the ones that created a straight angle as well. But they had to be adjacent. Now, once we learn complementary angles, they don't have to be adjacent anymore. Even though these two angles never touch, 30 plus 60 is equal to 90 degrees, so therefore they are complementary. So complementary angles are two angles, or the sum of the two angles where their sum is equal to 90 degrees. So if we want to know if two angles are complementary, or if I tell you that they're complementary, we know that their angle measurements add to 90 degrees. All right, so that is one of the definitions you have to know before. And like I said in the last section, they had to be adjacent for us to apply a question like this. But now that we're learning complementary angles and that they just add, or the sum of their angles is 90 degrees, the angles don't need to be adjacent anymore. It could just be two angles that were given, and I can say here is angle A, and I can say here is angle B. And if I say that angle B is 50 degrees and I tell you that angle A and angle B are complementary, well, we have enough information now to figure out what angle A's measurement is, because I know that these two angles would have to add up to be 90. And if this is 50, that means angle A must be 40. All right, so we can now use this information to help us solve for questions. And then the other key definition that you guys need to know are supplementary angles. And supplementary angles are two angles who add up, or their sum is 180 degrees. All right, so like I was talking about with our complementary, we did a problem like this in the last video where the two angles formed a straight line, and we were able to solve that because they were adjacent. But now, same thing as with the complementary angles. Once we tell you that things are supplementary, they no longer need to be adjacent. They just have to add to 180 degrees. Whoops, didn't mean to put that there. They just have to add to 180 degrees. And as long as if they add to 180 degrees, they are supplementary. So once we tell you that, we know that they add to 180 degrees. They could be adjacent like they are here. And if they're adjacent like that and form a straight line, we actually don't even need to tell you that they're supplementary. We can visually see that and know. But when they're not adjacent like they are here, we can either tell you that they're supplementary, or we can prove it by adding their angles together. And the same thing I did up here, if I give you this smaller angle and say that, well, this one's 10 degrees, and then I give you another angle over here, and I say, well, this is angle A and this is angle B, and they are supplementary, well, we have enough information then to figure out what angle B's measurement is, because we know if they're supplementary, they must add to 180 degrees. All right, now, the way that I would always tell my students, or get my students to try and remember this, because when we're dealing with complementary or supplementary, students always seem to remember, oh, well, that's telling us that they add up to some measurement. Well, on a number line, 90 will come before 180. And in our alphabet, C comes before S. So you can try and help you remember that, all right, well, complementary, C comes before S, 90 is before 180. So the first of each correspond with each other, and we can help us remember that. Same thing, the 180 will come after 90 on the number line. S comes after C in the alphabet. So we can remember that, all right, well, it's not like this mathematical way of remembering, but this helps us with little tricks and tips to figure out, okay, well, complementary and supplementary, we know they add to something, and we know that they add to 90 or 180. Well, the first of each are together, and the second of each are together, meaning the first number that would appear and the first letter that would appear in the alphabet are together, and the second number that would appear on a number line and the second letter in the alphabet that would appear between the two are together as well. All right, but this is what you have to know. Complementary angles will add up to 90 degrees, and supplementary angles add up to 180. All right, so let's go ahead and answer some questions on this, and then that'll be it for this video. All right, so for these problems, you're just asked to tell whether they are complementary, supplementary, or neither. All right, so you're just trying to identify what the relationship is with them. So we're not actually using this to then solve anything yet. We're just trying to make sure that we understand these relationships. So what we need to do, if we want to determine that these angles are any of these, we need to then add our angle measurements together. So for this one, we would do 70 plus 110. And we know that that's equal to 180. So now, when angles add up to 180 degrees, we know that they are supplementary. So this first one, A, is supplementary. For the next one, just because this looks like it's a right angle, we can't go off of appearance. All right, you have to go off of the factual information given to you. So if I don't give you a block there, you can't say, oh, well, that looks like a right angle, therefore they're complementary. No, we have to actually check. So 41 plus 49, what does that actually add up to? Now, that does add up to 90, so we know that they are, and that they are complementary and that they do form a right angle, but we can't just go off of the appearance. So we would then say that these are complementary. All right, and then our last one, well, same thing. Even though this doesn't look like a straight line, we can't just go off the appearance. Let's go off of the numbers, all right? Because if I'm drawing things for you or someone's drawing things, maybe they messed up a little bit, and we don't, when we have the numbers provided, we don't just go off of the way that it appears. We go off the numbers. So we will add 128 plus 62. Well, 128 plus 62 is 190. So it is more, or is not less than 108, or I'm sorry, it is more than 180, but all we care about is that it is not 180. And since it doesn't add up to 90 or 180, that means that that is neither. All right, so that's just making sure that you guys are able to identify and know if they're supplementary or complementary. And now we're going to go through questions where we're going to tell you, hey, these angles are supplementary. Now solve for the missing one or solve for the variable. All right, so for this problem here, we're asked to first identify the relationship of the angles and then solve. Well, when I see this block here, I know that that means it is a right angle, and I know that right angles are 90 degrees. So since these two angles are adjacent and they form that right angle, I know that they are complementary. So I know that these are complementary angles, and even though you didn't actually need this video to answer this question because we did it with the adjacent one and just given that right angle, we know that they're complementary, so we know that these two add up to 90 degrees. So 4x plus 36 adds up to 90 degrees since they are complementary, and they give us this block here as well. Now we can just go ahead and solve. So we can subtract 36 from both sides. So now I get 4x is equal to 54, and then I'm going to divide each side by 4, and that means that x is then equal to, let's see, 13.5. All right, so when we're answering and we're dealing with this, you can get decimals for angle measurements. You can get decimals for your variables as well, but this will be our answer, that x is equal to 13.5. All right, now, what we could have done is this one we asked you to identify the relationship first, but I could also give you these separate and say that this was 4x and this is 36 degrees. And I could have labeled them angle A and angle B. And if I tell you that they're complementary, we would still solve this the exact same way we did, all right? Because you have to know that complementary means that they add to 90, and we can go ahead and solve it using that method. All right, there's one more question we're going to go through, and then that'll be it for this video. All right, now I know in that very last 2 questions ago, I said we don't ever go off of the appearance, and I don't like having you go off the appearance. So on your tests, if they form a straight line, I will always tell you that they form a straight line, or I'll tell you that they're supplementary. So I don't want you getting into the habit of just saying, oh, okay, this looks like a straight line, so I'm going to go with it. But we could take our protractor. Unfortunately, we're not in school right now to learn how to do this, but we could take our protractor and measure this and see that this does form a straight line. So for the straight lines, we can go off and say, okay, this forms a straight line. And since straight lines we know equal 180 degrees, we can say that these two angles are supplementary. All right, so if I don't give you that information on the test, which I would, you would be able to use your protractor to then measure that and say, okay, this does equal 180 degrees. And we are going to learn how to use protractors and compasses when we get back in school. All right, but since they're supplementary, we know that they add to 180 degrees. And we could have also done this without even learning about supplementary angles today, because since they are adjacent and we form a straight line, we did this in the last video. So I can add the two angles together. X plus x minus 4 is equal to 180. And now I'm just solving. Well, we're going to simplify this side and get 2x minus 4 is equal to 180. Then we're going to go ahead and add 4 over. And now we get 2x is equal to 184. And then to solve, we divide each side by 2. And that means x is equal to 92. All right, so that will be our final answer. So like I did on the last one, we could have told you that they're supplementary, and then the angles could have been separated as x and x minus 4. And if I tell you that they're supplementary, you're still going to use the same method to solve. All right, so what you need to know is that supplementary angles add to 180 and complementary add to 90. All right, that's the definitions you have to be able to know and be able to apply. All right, and once you just remember those definitions, it just goes right back to what we were doing last unit with solving equations. And that's why it's really important that every unit you learn, you don't just do it, you learn it, because it always comes back. All right, that is it for this video.